Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Asiri, here with another virtual cup of coffee with top veterans in the civilian workforce. Today is episode number 288 with Steve Cannon.
As I look back on my career, the kind of key transition moments, something good happened every time I took a leap of faith. Every time I got out of my comfort zone is when something good happened. So this is going to be an opportunity as you transition out. You're going to get out of your comfort zone. You're going to stretch. You're going to have to grow. You're going to have to adapt, and it will be uncomfortable. But growth happens through discomfort.
Steve served as president and CEO of Mercedes Benz USA and now oversees the parent company for the Falcons and other iconic brands. We talk about the rejection that Steve faced on his way to these incredible accomplishments and how persistence, taking advice from wherever you can get it, and creating purpose in the workplace made all the difference in his career. Having served in such high-level leadership positions, Steve and I talk about the differences between leadership in and out of the military, as well as a common misconception about work-life balance. And we talk about the importance of getting out of one's comfort zone because this is precisely the area where all growth occurs. As always, at beyondtheuniform.org, you'll find show notes with links to everything we discuss. I highly, highly recommend that you check out a YouTube video there that Steve made about leadership principles, or that was made about Steve and his leadership principles. Special thanks to Sid Braybeck, who on Apple Podcasts wrote, "I always hear something inspiring, 5 stars." Thank you to you and all 112 of you who have left positive reviews on Apple Podcasts. So with that, let's dive in to my interview with Steve. Joining me today in Atlanta, Georgia, my guest is Steve Cannon. Steve, thank you so much for joining us on Beyond the Uniform.
Justin, pleasure to be with you.
And so for listeners at beyondtheuniform.org in the show notes, there is a whole litany of links about Steve. And I just say that because it's difficult to do his bio justice. But here is the abbreviated version for context for our discussion. He is currently the CEO of the AMB Group, which is the parent company for the Falcons, the soccer team Atlanta United, the retail chain PGA Tour Superstore, and a Montana guest ranch. He started out at West Point, after which he served as an Army Airborne Ranger and served as first lieutenant in West Germany during the fall of the Iron Curtain. He worked as a principal at the Richards Group, which is the largest independent branding agency in the nation, with a staff of over 700 and an annual billings above $1 billion. And he's worked at Mercedes Benz USA, first as vice president of marketing and then as president and CEO. And certainly not least, and perhaps most impressively, he is also the father of 9 children. So he's got a very abundant family life as well, on top of a very rich career. And so, Steve, maybe to start things off, could you take us back to 1991 when you left the Army and just walk through what that transition process was like and that first job search?
Yeah. The Army was this was the end of the Cold War. We talked about peace dividends. This was before the Gulf War had kind of kicked into view. And, the Army was going through a pretty significant reduction in force. So there was some downsizing going on. I made the decision that, my 5 years was great, and I was going to now transition into a civilian career. I had a son, so married with an 8-month-old. So there was a little bit of pressure when it came to getting out so that I could get productive, and find a job. So I transitioned out of Germany back to the United States and started looking with the typical search companies that work with junior military officers, and they opened up a variety of options. I think I was looking at a job with Baxter Pharmaceutical, Pfizer, another pharmaceutical company. They do some pretty significant hiring of military officers. But sort of the job that intrigued me most that I came across in my transition was this chief of staff to the president and CEO for Mercedes Benz of North America. And as I looked at all 3 opportunities, I interviewed with the guy, a wonderful German named Eric Krumpe. He didn't care that I didn't know anything about the car business. He liked my West Point background. He liked the fact that I spoke German and understood the culture enough. And so I decided to take the job with Mercedes Benz, which is a pretty neat opportunity.
Well, I want to ask a question on that, but I have to disclose that my father is a avid Mercedes fan. He's restored 4 or 5 different Mercedes. When I was born, I was brought home from the hospital in a 1980s 240 diesel Mercedes that, as of a couple years ago, had over 200,000 miles on it. So he is probably the biggest person I know who's excited about this interview today. But I wanted to kind of delve into that, your career at Mercedes Benz, and you had so much different experiences there. What is it that you think helped you be so successful at Mercedes, especially given that you didn't have this massive amount of experience to start in the automotive space?
Well, I obviously got a lucky break, right? Working for a guy who was willing to sort of allow me to learn the car business and didn't expect 10 years of automotive background. He was intrigued by, again, by my experience in Germany, by the West Point, by the service in the military, all those things. So he took a leap of faith on me to bring me in. And I tell you, that experience working straight for the CEO, responsible for the entire enterprise, and back then it was probably about $5, $6, $7 billion company, was just extraordinary. And I can remember spending hours in his office as we'd go back and forth on issues. And what I appreciated most is that he took the time for me, and he was a teacher. He was a busy executive that didn't need to take the time on me at all, and could have said, "Hey, sink or swim, figure it out on your own." That's how most job transitions are. But the fact that the CEO took time for me to teach, to coach, I think that was a real differentiator, and it got me set off on such a wonderful footing that I'm really appreciative. So a lot of times it takes luck, and I was lucky to have someone who mentored and coached me at my very first job coming out of the Army. So that was really neat.
It makes me think of those general or admiral's aide positions where you're shadowing a general in their role. I mean, I can only imagine what a incredible lens that must have been, and it must have been like drinking through a fire hose. But just learning so much from someone who's so senior is an incredible, optimal starting point for a transition.
It was an amazing transition. I got exposure to so many things. I think one of my early differentiators, aside from the fact that I spoke German, was I wrote a bunch of his speeches. So very similar to what an aide does, a general's aide does. And, I was a pretty good writer, and that helped differentiate me, or it allowed me to demonstrate value to him very early. I could think through a topic, I could write in his voice, and he didn't have to do a whole lot of editing. So for me, that was an early ticket to differentiate myself, to get him appreciating me. And then he really used me as a force multiplier, right? He couldn't be everywhere, but he sent me into key projects where he wanted eyes and involvement that he didn't have the time for himself. So for me, it was a win-win. I got to get exposure to varying parts of the company at a very high level really, really early. So I really equate those 2.5 years where I was working directly for him. I got, 8 years of experience, what it seemed like, because of the exposure I was lucky enough to have.
That's incredible. What about when we fast forward ahead, when you become the president and CEO of Mercedes Benz USA? USA. I keep on wanting to say USAA. What was that like? I mean, I can't think of a way to condense that down, but I'm just curious. It's so rare for me to speak with someone who's had experience at such a senior level. What was your day-to-day life like, and what sorts of things occupied your day?
Well, I'll backtrack just a little bit. I left the company. That's when I took that job at that big ad agency, the Richards Group. So I actually left Mercedes-Benz for about a 6 or 7 year period. And then interesting opportunity, the chief marketing officer job came available. I heard about it while I was still working at this large ad agency. I reached out to the then president and said, I sent him an email and said, hey, Ernst, I heard you're looking for a new chief marketing officer. I'm here with this big ad agency. I'm running a big car ad account. I think I'm the perfect guy for the job. So I put myself out there, and interestingly enough, I got back sort of a form rejection letter, which was kind of a neat moment for me. It wasn't great. I had to get over it. But I looked at the rejection letter and I said, I'm not going to let this stand without getting an interview. So after I got done being angry about the form rejection letter, I called up a bunch of people that I knew who still knew the CEO, and they pestered him essentially until he took an interview with me. And I got in, told them my story, shared my experience, and I had the job a week later. So one of the cool things that I love to share is I had that difficult moment where I got that rejection letter, which I have framed, by the way, as just another kind of key moment as I look back on my career, where I could have stayed angry and gone in a different direction, but I said, you know what, I'm not gonna let this go until I get a face-to-face. If I get a face-to-face and he wants to go into a different direction, then I'll be satisfied, but I wasn't gonna go without at least telling my story. So that was kind of a cool moment that got me back to Mercedes-Benz.
That's so wild. I love the resilience, because I can imagine how difficult that would be. I can just imagine myself in that situation, just saying like, okay, I put myself out there and then moving on. But it sounds like there was something that stood with you where you thought you just really wanted to go for this and really wanted to go that extra mile. And I admire that perseverance rather than just giving up, as I think most people would have in that situation.
Yeah, so that's just one of those kind of key moments when you look back on your career and you say, hey, there was a couple of pivotal moments where the whole career could have gone in a completely different direction. That was one of those moments. I was thrilled that it worked out because it eventually led to the CEO role.
And how did that come about? Like, how did you make that transition?
So that was an interesting transition, and I got a little luck along the way. And any CEO or senior leader that says they didn't get some help along the way or a lucky break didn't happen, if they don't tell you that, they're not telling you the full truth. So here I am, the chief marketing officer. My boss, the CEO, ended up getting ousted, kind of relieved of duty for doing some things he probably shouldn't have been doing. And I, once they got done sharing with us that he wouldn't be leaving and not coming back, 10 minutes later, the global boss rings me on my phone and says, hey, Steve, would you like to take that president and CEO job? I said, I didn't have to hesitate for very long, Justin. I said, absolutely, yes. It was a job that I've been looking at for a long time, and finally an opening came. And so I was all in. So I went kind of overnight from the chief marketing officer job to the CEO job. And then once I got there, it was about recovering from, the sudden departure of a executive that was kind of relieved of duty, rehabilitating the team and getting them oriented around a mission and a trajectory that we wanted to track while, under now my leadership.
Mm. What were those, it's just wild to think of how that comes about unexpectedly. And I love the enthusiasm and the willingness to just take on that amount of responsibility. What did that look like on a day-to-day basis?
So when I took over as the CEO, one of the biggest challenges we were designing and manufacturing wonderful cars, but the experience that people were reporting back about, the delivery, the ownership experience, the service experience at the 375 dealerships across the country, it was really mediocre at best. So J.D. Power measures customer satisfaction in the car business, and they essentially had us ranked in the mid-20s. So here is Mercedes-Benz, one of the most global iconic brands, manufactures the most iconic cars in the world, and the customer experience associated with that ownership was ranked number 22 behind Honda, behind Toyota, behind Hyundai. So essentially, I put a stake in the ground along with our leadership team and said, this can't be. So we as an organization are going to go all in on customer experience. We're going to reorient our culture and our reward systems and our entire company around the prospect of delivering a world-class customer experience. So that was a really interesting journey to galvanize not only our own organization, which was about 2,500 people, but the 30,000 people that worked across Mercedes-Benz dealerships in the United States, to try to galvanize all of those folks around the prospect of delivering excellence in customer experience was not an easy task, but it was certainly a fun and exciting challenge.
I love, there's a video of you that went viral from 2014. You were talking about leadership beliefs. And for listeners, I called this out in a previous episode to make sure that people had a chance to watch this. It's like a 7-minute video prior to this interview. One thing I wanted to ask you about, though, because it's just mind-boggling to think of the scale of organization that you were leading. Have you found differences? I imagine there's a lot of leadership that you took from West Point, that you took from the Army, that helped you in that. I'm wondering, was there anything that you needed to intentionally leave behind, or things that you needed to change from leadership in the military to apply to this position?
Yes is the short answer. Look, I kind of consider myself a student of leadership, and I had this amazing opportunity where I got to go to West Point, a leadership school, and then I got to practice that leadership with small units like platoons and at the company level. And then I left the Army and got to continue my leadership practice from a military standpoint, transitioning into civilian standpoint, and then lead units now all the way up to chief executive level, where you're responsible for thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So I've gotten to experience leadership across larger and larger scaled organizations, but all along the way, I consider myself a learner. So I've had examples of leaders that I look at their leadership and I say, I will never do that in my life. So I have as many of my leadership principles are informed by negative examples as there are positive examples. And since I've gotten out into the civilian world, I use the word leadership all the time. I don't use the word management really ever, because leaders are so responsible for the environment, the culture, the welfare of their people. I think that's really omnipresent in the military. It's less practiced in the civilian world. So I've tried to take some of the best practices that I learned in the military and apply them to the civilian sector, which maybe doesn't put as much of a premium on leadership, right? Lives are not at stake. And so the consequences aren't as dire. And I've seen so many sort of lazy examples of bad leadership in the civilian world that I can honestly say that my years spent in the military have been absolutely indispensable into who I am in the civilian sector as a leader.
Mm. And another thing I wanted to ask about, so, when I see someone with your background, the story that I come up with initially is, Steve must have had this ironclad plan from the Army to one day helm such a major company. And then I came across, you wrote an article in Fortune magazine back in 2015, and it was entitled, "The Best Way to Plan for a Successful Career, Forget the Plan." So I'm wondering, could you talk a little bit more about that article, and particularly given that so many people listening to this podcast, they're wanting to know how to navigate their civilian career. They're wanting to know what they should do, what they're born to do once they're out of the military. So what advice do you have for them through that lens?
So take advice wherever you can get it. Link up with people, find mentors. The way I I do a lot of mentoring for folks in the military that are transitioning out, and my advice to every single one of them is is to have 50 cups of coffee. Go have coffee with someone who you think you might learn from, who's either successfully made the transition or somebody that you'd aspire to be someday. If you can find a way to have coffee with them, you're gonna learn something. You're gonna begin honing your own story, because at the end you've got to package yourself when you transition from the military to the civilian sector, and it's really essentially a marketing proposition. How well can I package my story and all the amazing skills that I picked up in the military, but I need to package them in a way that's relevant, free of jargon, free of acronyms, free of language that might be common to the military. How do I package that in a way that is compelling to a new audience? And that's an exercise that takes time and it takes repetition. So go have 50 cups of coffee, take as much advice as you can from people who have made the transition. To me, those are great starting points. And for me, it's about getting beyond the resume. So a resume is simply a chronological articulation of your work experience, right? There's not much compelling or interesting in that. I tell people, I want you to write your elevator pitch. You got 60 seconds to tell me the story about you that makes you interesting, impactful, that makes me want to have a follow-on meeting with you, that might make me want to invite you to dinner or to lunch and ultimately to hire you. So go through the process of writing your story. What is your elevator pitch? And then when you have these 50 cups of coffee with 50 different people, what you're going to find is you're going to get better and better at articulating that story. And I guarantee if you go through that process, you will find a job. So that's sort of the advice that I give a lot of folks when they're facing kind of that scary unknown of transitioning. But I also caveat it with your skill sets are awesome. I love and I hire regularly military people. The level of discipline, the level of grit, the level of stick-to-itiveness and get it done. No excuses. Those kinds of things are great skill sets. And look, the world that most military folks have gone through over the last 18 years, it's changing, it's dynamic, it's a place where decisions are pushed all the way to the edge of an organization. And so these are all like really valuable skill sets. So I tell folks that are transitioning, I want you to take this from a place of confidence. What you have is desperately needed out there in the work environment. And now it's just a question of finding the right opportunity that fits you.
I think that's beautiful. I love that. First of all, I love your thought of 50 cups of coffee. I think it's such a great way to learn. And for listeners, that's essentially what this podcast is. It's your virtual cup of coffee with Steve. But I love your thought too of writing your story, having that elevator pitch, and then practicing it relentlessly, really refining it to be able to tell and craft that story. And I echo what you said about the widely desired skill set that every listener has, regardless of what you're doing in the military, the integrity, the discipline, the ability to break through walls, the tenacity, all of these things that you learn in spades in the military are so vital on the other side. One thing I was curious about is, you're early in your career, you kind of start down this path of developing industry knowledge in the automotive industry. And then you also build up incredible experience in the functional area of marketing. And I'm just kind of curious for someone listening who might be on active duty, who doesn't really know, they're not really attracted to a given industry or to a given functional role. Do you have any advice on how they might figure out where to start that path, or where they might initially start to build their career?
Well, listen, I encourage folks to not just think operations, right? That's the natural path. Okay, I've been in a military unit, which is about training, very operative, and so we see a lot of folks going into factory or more operational kind of roles inside of companies. For me, it's find something that you think you're going to love, right? What attracted me about marketing is it's a little bit of a art and it's a science, right? I was an economics major at West Point. Economics is part art, but since it's behavioral because it impacts people, there's an art and a science to it. And marketing is very much like that, right? I got to target my message, and I can do that very scientifically and measurably to an audience, but ultimately I've got to package it in a way that makes you pay attention, that makes you sit up, and it makes you do something, right? So I was attracted to that. And I don't think there's a formula for anybody, Justin. And it's really about it's really back to that 50 cups of coffee. When you go on those interviews, ask a ton of questions. Remember, you're not being interviewed; you're also interviewing. And at the end, an employment is a two-way street, right? I will work for you. I will bring you my best self and my best efforts every single day, as long as you pay me what I'm worth. You give me an environment that I love to show up every single day, and you give me an opportunity to grow. I give people advice all the time. The minute you feel like that contract is not being honored, you're not growing, you don't feel like there's more opportunity, then it's time to look elsewhere. So I don't think there's any given place to start when you're looking, but it's a law of numbers, Justin. If you have enough conversations in different industry verticals, you're going to find something that will attract you, and then as you're attracted to that could be your life's calling. I had no idea I was going to go into the car business, but all of a sudden this really cool opportunity came up to work for an iconic brand, and all of a sudden, I'm a car guy, and I'm 20 years in the car space, until Arthur Blank came calling, and this really neat opportunity to jump from cars to sports came my way, and that was a fascinating and a wonderful transition. So, there really is no set path. Back to that, kind of throw out the plan. All you can do is do your best to navigate from point to point. And the one thing I asked myself at every career move was, is this going to add to my story? Or will it detract from my story? So if I take on this career move, how does that add to my personal portfolio of experiences? And for me, as long as it added to my portfolio, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. And then at some point, an opportunity like sports came along, and Arthur looked at a portfolio that included leadership, that included sports, that included West Point, that included the military, and suddenly that package, my portfolio, was a compelling thing. So I asked myself at every point in my career, how does this new move help enhance my story, my portfolio of experiences? And that was a pretty decent litmus for me in trying to navigate the unknown of, should I take this new job or should I make this corporate move?
I think that's so great. I mean, first of all, I love this thought, because sometimes I feel like the process of discovering one's calling or what their career is going to look like is this academic, done in isolation exercise. And what you're talking about, I hope this is very accessible for most listeners, like the thought of having those 50 coffee chats, that active and proactive process. What a great way to get a sense for what different career paths look like, what types of people you might like, having that serendipity of meeting different people who may present different opportunities. I love that because it's so achievable and tactical, and I think it's something that listeners can put to use right away. But I also love that thought of, as one's career develops, and I know many listeners are veterans who've been out of the military for years now, I love that thought of just looking point to point, one step at a time, and just taking that litmus test, like you said, of does this add to or detract from this overall portfolio? It seems like a nice way to evaluate different career options as you're moving along.
Sure. And I'll also kind of debunk, or at least for me, debunk the statement, just find a job that you're passionate about. You're not going to find that out until you're doing stuff. So, for me, the laws of inertia apply. get out, get the body in motion, find a job that you can feel good about, get started. As that body is in motion, it's easier to pivot or move toward a different path. And I guarantee along the way, if you luck will play a big part of it too, but you'll find your passion. I mean, I didn't know that car marketing was my passion when I got out of the military. How could you even answer that question, getting out of the military? What are you passionate about? I don't know. So go find a great job, weigh the pros and cons. Always do a pro-con analysis. To me, that is great advice. Grab that yellow legal pad, put a plus on one side, a minus on another side. Every time an opportunity comes your way, fill out the pluses and the minuses. And if the pluses exceed the minuses and everything else falls into place, get the job, whether it's your passion in life or not. And you might just find along the way that you've discovered your passion, but at least you're now employed. You're building skill sets that you can leverage elsewhere, right? So the old adage that life is what happens while you're planning other things, I think that applies. So do the pros and cons, find a great job, and even if you don't think it's your lifetime passion, you're going to build skills that you'll be able to leverage into something else, and then grow your portfolio. And at some point, that portfolio might be of interest to someone who's buying talent, and all of a sudden you find yourself in another cool job.
I think that's great because that advice of follow your passion, I think, is this insurmountable obstacle, and it can put a lot of pressure on someone. But what you're describing is so much more actionable, where you can try it out, munch on it for a little while, figure out what you like and don't like. And it's difficult to know, in absence of that real world experience and real world data, whether or not it's going to be a good fit. So I think what you're describing is much more easy for listeners to apply than just that nebulous advice of follow your passion.
Yeah, and nowadays the job market has changed so significantly. Gone forever are the days of job for life with a single company and a pension. All those things have gone the way of the dodo bird. So now it's all about this two-way contract where I'll work for you as long as I'm gaining, I'm growing. If I feel like I'm no longer growing, I can change companies, and it's very typical to look at younger kids in the workforce, where they've worked for 4 or 5 companies and they're only out, 6, 7 years in the workplace. That used to be kind of a warning flag. That is no longer a warning flag. So you can now, I wouldn't encourage job hopping, and certainly frivolous job hopping. Stick at a place as long as you feel like you're growing, your personal portfolio is growing, your experiences are growing. If that stops, then it's time to look elsewhere. And over time, you grow a really compelling portfolio that will be of value to someone that's hiring.
That's great. What about now in your current role? So you, with the AMB Group, you are involved with National Football League's Atlanta Falcons, Atlanta United of Major League Soccer. You've got the Mercedes Benz Stadium. You've got PGA Tour Superstore. What does your day-to-day life look like now? And how do you juggle all of these competing demands of leading across multiple business segments?
It's a challenge, but it's a wonderful, wonderful challenge. Every one of those properties, entities, companies is really about bringing people together. So I tell our folks that we're not in the sports business, we're in the hospitality business. Every Sunday we bring 70,000 people together, so where they can forget their politics, they can forget their troubles, we can unify generations, we can unify ethnicities, belief systems, and demographics, and bring them under one beautiful roof of Mercedes-Benz Stadium to cheer, to unite, to high-five each other. So that's our product, that's our business. And when you talk about trying to add purpose to the workplace, that's how I articulate it to our team. We're in the community building business. For so many people who have so many troubles and worries, we give them a little island of 3 hours on a Saturday or Sunday that is about their team, that brings people together. I'd argue that's something we need more of in this country and in this world. So that's what we do across soccer, across the stadium, football, and even our PGA Tour Superstore business. It's about creating a warm, engaging, hospitable experience that will help them become better golfers, and hopefully they'll buy a driver along the way or some golf balls and some stuff. So really, it's about framing the mission for all of our people in a way that really makes them want to jump out of bed in the morning, and come to work. That's not easy to do, but if you get people fired up that their work means more than just driving revenue or driving the P&L statement, that it's about making the world a better place. If you can find that, man, you found something that's pretty magical. So I try to do that every single day. The nice thing about my job is, in the morning I'll have a meeting on we're adding a new store for PGA Tour Superstores. We're about to have a grand opening, and then pivot. And the next meeting is about how do we improve the game day experience for the Atlanta Falcons, and then pivot to a meeting on Atlanta United. So the fun part is there's never a dull moment, and I'm jumping from one kind of cool subject to the other. So I feel very privileged that I've had this neat opportunity to work for an iconic businessman like Arthur Blank, who is truly one of the best owners in sports, and has created a values-driven environment that unites all of our actions every single day. So we have a true north. We've got a value system. My job is to focus on creating a phenomenal culture where people love what they do every single day, and then the outcomes follow that, right? Don't chase market share as a leader. Don't chase the sales numbers. Don't chase the profit number. If you create a phenomenal environment where people love what they do, the business outcomes follow. Unfortunately, too often we put the business outcomes as the most important thing, and then you get people making dumb decisions.
I think that's great. I think that's such a great encapsulation of elevating your job to a higher purpose. And I know that from so many of the interviews that we've done with Beyond the Uniform, that purpose is often something that veterans miss in the job that they go on to after the military. And I would encourage listeners, I'll put this in the show notes, but we did an interview with Peter Docker, who's with Simon Sinek at the Start With Why Foundation. That's a great episode to listen to, because as you can hear from Steve, like when he's talking, you can hear his passion, you can hear the power that this purpose gives. I think it's really great to be able to find that purpose in whatever you're doing. And like Steve has said, being able to point that out for your team members and the people you work with to have that mission for them. A couple questions that come out of that for me, Steve. One is, you throughout your career, it seems like, you are doing a lot, and we haven't even gotten into yet all of the philanthropic and volunteer things that you do. So you obviously stay busy. One question that comes from our listeners a lot is around work-life balance. And I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on work-life balance? I think, some guests I've had on the show dislike that term. Some people strive to find that balance. How have you sought to set some sort of balance in your life, especially given the large family that you've also created simultaneously?
So it's always a challenge, but for me, we're at the end of the day, we're only one person, right? We're not a work person and then an out of work person. And to sort of create that hard line delineation, I don't think really describes the real picture, because, in this digital world where we live in, we're always connected. So, we're always kind of checking, doing a quick, even on days off, we dispatch an email or a text here or there. So the lines between kind of work and life are getting blurrier. So for me, again, it's about making sure that we create an environment, the work environment, that really makes people feel appreciated, cared for. The ultimate testament to a leader is if you can create such a wonderful work environment that people actually find their purpose, self-actualize while they're at work. If you can create that, boy, it's not even called work anymore, right? It's because I'm gaining in self-esteem. I'm gaining in my life's journey as I show up to work. So it's not a zero-sum game as I take away from one, I add to the other. So you got to, I think, look at it a little bit more holistically. That said, work doesn't get everything, and with 9 children, my challenge is that, I want to be part of their lives. I want them to know Dad loves them, cares for them, is involved in their lives. So, I talk to my kids, multiple times per week. Whenever I travel, I got 4 kids living in Manhattan. So whenever I travel for business, I make an extra point. If I can take a day on either side or a night on either side, I'll say, hey kids, Dad's in town. Who wants to go to dinner? So, it's about making the effort. And it's about making sure, kids know that you're involved in their lives, that you care about them. It's not always about the quantity of the FaceTime, but it's always about the quality. So you got to be present. And unfortunately, we live in a very distracted world with devices that actually isolate us from people, pull us away from people. So you got to be there and make quality time. So you kind of long-winded way of saying it's not easy. It's a challenge because early in your careers, you got to put the work in, right? There's just no way to say it any other way. Michael Jordan, when he became great because he worked harder than everybody else, and he stayed after practice and he shot, did foul shots and special shots, and then game day he made it all look so easy. But that came from all the work that he put in. So good, hard, real work is a prerequisite to differentiate yourself. That doesn't mean you need to sacrifice your life at the altar of business success. So I will tell you, I take my vacation. I'm involved in my kids' lives. For me, my marriage matters. And, for me, if I were to have business success and my kids didn't know me and I was divorced 3 times from my wife, I would consider that failure. So it's about creating the best balance that you can for yourself in your life and paying attention to the things that matter, right? What are the things that bring you joy? Kids, family, friends, connections, and if work fits in nicely with that, and if I as a leader can create a phenomenal environment where going to work isn't a 4-letter word, right? But it's a place that you go where you still feel connected, where you still like the people that work to the left and right of you, and suddenly that delineation becomes less important.
I know that we're running short on time, so I want to ask you about philanthropy and giving back, but for listeners, I want to give a little bit of a laundry list, and then Steve, you can take this wherever you'd like. But for listeners, so first of all, the chairman and owner of the Blank family of businesses, Arthur Blank, he also co-founded the Home Depot, which I'm sure listeners know is one of the largest employers of veterans in the country. You have also been directly involved with various philanthropic efforts, the Johnny Mac Soldiers Funds and the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. You've got the Atlanta Community Food Bank. You've got the Blank Foundation, Family Foundation. You've also led Atlanta Falcons USO tour through Kuwait and Iraq in 2018. You've taken 12 Falcon players and Coach Quinn to West Point. You do military day at training camp. You've got the Rookie Olympics with Navy SEALs and human performance training events. You've got members of the Falcons organization who for 3 years have won the Salute to Service Award, Coach Quinn and then Andrew Roberts and Ben Garland. So there's no shortage of ways in which you and your organization are giving back. Could you speak to what role that plays for you, philanthropy, giving back, contributing to the military community?
So, I believe every person has an obligation to make the world a better place, whether that better place is your family, your backyard, your community, on whatever stage that you play in. I feel like there's an obligation that's built into the human condition that says, hey, it's not just about us. It's about the people around us and how do we make that world a better place. So, I've lived that throughout my career, but suddenly I find myself connected to a guy like Arthur Blank, who is giving away hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to causes. He signed the Giving Pledge, which means his entire net worth, 95% of it, is going back to society through his foundation and through his philanthropy. So I work for this amazing guy, and now I'm attached to this platform that is the NFL and Mercedes Benz Stadium and Major League Soccer. And at the end of the day, these are wonderful, incredible, powerful, meaningful platforms in folks' lives. And if we only use them to drive profit, then we are leaving so much opportunity on the table. So my personal belief system is that we have got an all-volunteer Army. We've asked so much of that Army over the last 18 years, and I say Army, our military, right? Our armed services are out there in 140 countries, serving, in harm's way, interrupting families. So what we ask of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines is staggering. And if we as a society don't do everything we can to throw our arms around them, in a way to help them in transition, help them those that are struggling, then we're not living up to our societal pact. So for me, I've got an amazing owner. I've got this Atlanta Falcons, and how can we use this to drive attention, to shine a spotlight on military service? We've been doing a pretty good job of that. Our mission, I said when I joined Arthur, I'd like for us to be the benchmark in the NFL when it comes to sort of serving and giving back to the military. Those 3 back-to-back Salute to Service awards from the NFL are a pretty good proof point that we're operating in benchmark territory. And so, a couple of the philanthropies that I'm most passionate about, and this is based on personal experience. We set up with my West Point classmates from the class of 1986 a fund for a fallen classmate. His name is Johnny McHugh. Johnny Mack was the captain of our soccer team. He was killed in Afghanistan by a suicide bomber, left behind 5 kids. Well, a small group of us got together, said we're going to take care of his wife Connie and those 5 children. Well, we accomplished that mission. We raised money. We paid for their college educations. But then we said, think about the thousands and thousands of other kids whose parents went away and made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. We want to honor Johnny Mack by taking care of them. So we incorporated our 501c3. We banded together as a group that figured we could move the needle. And since that time, our mission is to provide college scholarships for children of the fallen. We've been doing this for the last 4 or 5 years. We've raised about $17 million. We've provided scholarships to more than 1,500 kids. So it's just a proof point that for me, is a reminder that I might have hung up my uniform 35, 40 years ago, but the obligation to serve is still there. So, I know how hard it is on the families of veterans and all that we ask of our soldiers. That's why I went to Iraq. That's why I took the Falcons over there, so that we could get up close and personal to that experience. It was life-changing. I wish every American could see what our soldiers are doing for us on the front lines of freedom, because if they did, and if they experienced it in a visceral way on the 110-degree heat in Iraq, they surely would do whatever they could to step up and help. So, for me, it's about using the platform in any way possible to shine a spotlight on service and sacrifice.
I think it's such an incredible example, and I love that call to service, and I even love the way you position that of, whatever playing field that means to you, giving back in some way, whether it's your backyard or in your case on this national scale. I think it's great. And it's amazing because you're layering purpose into your work life, and you're layering purpose outside of your work life. And I think that's going to be very appealing for our listeners who strive for that, who have this history of public service, and they want to find ways to continue to give back even after they take off that military uniform.
I would encourage. So, Justin, I would encourage every service member, once you're done, find that give back opportunity, whether it's through your church or through your local community. I can only say from experience that the more I've done on this front, the more I've personally benefited. I've grown as a human being. I've made connections with people I never would have connected with. So we are naturally wired, in the military to serve. Don't give up that service just because you hang up the uniform. Find a way to continue to serve outside of uniform, and you're going to be surprised at the impact that you will be able to have. And it preserves the brotherhood, right? The brotherhood, the sisterhood that we all felt, that kinship when we're in the military. A lot of veterans lose that when they get out. If you find a nonprofit or a cause that you can be passionate about, you're going to find that brotherhood and sisterhood, and you're going to make a difference, and you're going to continue serving, and you're going to find purpose. So as you're thinking about your transition, don't just think about the for-profit aspect. Yeah, you got to feed the family, but think about that nonprofit aspect as well.
This is incredible. Well, I always like to leave the last question open-ended, and that is you can take it one of two ways. Either what have we not covered that you want to make sure listeners know, or what are some parting words of wisdom that you'd like to offer to the people on active duty, the veterans, and their families who are listening to this?
Yeah, so I this is advice I give to my kids, and as I look back on my career, the kind of key transition moments, something good happened every time I took a leap of faith. Every time I got out of my comfort zone is when something good happened. So this is going to be an opportunity as you transition out. You're going to get out of your comfort zone. You're going to stretch. You're going to have to grow. You're going to have to adapt. And it will be uncomfortable. But growth happens through discomfort, right? That's why we go to the gym, right? We challenge our muscles. We throw different things at them, and their only way to adapt is to grow. Well, it's no different with the human organism. The more we spend time outside of that comfort zone, those are the times when growth spurts happen. Those are times when those leaps take place. So, embrace that discomfort. It's okay to be uncomfortable. You're going to have to learn a new language. You're going to have to learn a new skill set. You're going to have to pivot and adapt. But just understand that that's okay, that's good, and it's part of the growth process. So just embrace it.
I think that's so great, and I think that that's relevant regardless whether someone's on active duty or they've been out of the military for 10 or 20 years, just that embracing that discomfort as a sign of growth. I think it really shifts on its head the discomfort a lot of us fear and try and avoid, and rather put a spin on it where we can approach those things with eagerness because we know that they're leading to our growth. They're leading us to become better, stronger people. Well,
Amen.
Well, Steve, thank you so much, not just for your time today on the show, but for all the work that you've done since your military service, and in addition to your military service, that's helping make our world a better place and helping our service members and military veteran community. Thank you.
Justin, it's been an honor to share my story, my experience with your listeners.
Surface.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Quick couple admin points. We release brand new episodes every single Monday and Thursday. Those are usually recorded about a month or so before they go live. Every Monday and Thursday, we have an interview, usually almost always with a military veteran about their civilian career. More and more, we're starting to add in experts who may not be veterans, but may have some expertise that will help the military veteran community. Saturdays, I typically post more of a behind-the-scenes episode, which is a free-form format. I try to use what I'm calling a mullet format, and by that I mean business up front, party in the back, talking through admin points, professional topics related to the podcast. It might be a conversation I had that week. It might have been an interview I had that week, but just trying to share things that are top of mind that may help you in more of a free form, straight from the heart format. And then the party in the back is the personal side of things, just kind of more free-flowing thoughts on life, on improving oneself, just kind of whatever's going on in life, and trying to be authentic and honest about those things as well. Special thanks. We have an all-volunteer army of people behind Beyond the Uniform making this possible. We do this on our lunch breaks, on our evenings, on our weekends, because we love the military community. We want to give back. We want to make a difference. We want that as part of the purpose in our life that we valued in the military. So special thanks to Steve Bain. Steve does pretty much everything. He helps secure guests. He does our newsletter. He keeps the reels rolling and keeps me sane. Kathleen Dillon, the first person to join our team. She writes text transcripts of every single episode. It's wild. She keeps up with 2 of these a week despite a demanding career and education right now. But those transcripts help us get more SEO value, helps her audience more. Andrew Woolridge is our data guru. He helps us understand the numbers, which is the easiest way for us to figure out how we can better support you, and adds kind of the data oversight for that. Rick Healy does all of our social media. He is gaining more and more of an audience for us by getting our videos, getting our podcasts out on social channels. The best way to stay in contact with us is if you go to beyondtheuniform.org, there is a newsletter. You'll have a little pop-up that comes up. You can put your email in. We email twice per month. We try to be respectful, but it is a great way to get appraised of upcoming events, upcoming interviews, promos where companies are giving discounts to Beyond the Uniform listeners, and more. This does cost money to put on. We are committed to not charging veterans directly, and the way that we kind of offset costs is through corporate sponsors. So if you know of a company that would like to get in front of a military audience and their families, that's one way that we can both add value to our members, but also offset the costs of Beyond the Uniform and give us a little bit of budget to start expanding what we're doing. So that's the best way you can help us. If that's not something that you can do, a positive review on iTunes is greatly appreciated. Have a wonderful week. We will be back Monday, Thursday, and Saturday with more interviews. And keep up the listening. Take care.